have the honor of talking to these two lovely ladies this afternoon to talk about sustainability models, because Liberty Public Schools is a wonderful example of things that they have been able to implement, scale, and sustain. And so I'm going to, first of all, introduce you. So Dr. Jeanette Westfall, what's your fun, long title? I know it's right behind me, but what's your title?
Curriculum Instruction and Staff Development.
Use your microphone, please.
Curriculum Instruction and Staff Development, and I get to do everything fun.
There you go. And Dr. Elizabeth Heidi, would you like to also give us your title, please?
Sure. Assistant Superintendent of Academic Services.
Fantastic. So the first question I have is really, can you tell us a little bit about Liberty Public Schools?
Sure. We, Liberty Public Schools are just outside of Kansas City, so we're the northern suburb of Kansas City. We have about 12,600 students and about 1,000 teachers, give or take a little bit. So it's a little bit about us.
Yeah, that's great. Tell us about your process to transition to OER.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotcha. It's been less of a transition and more of a journey. We started our work in OER, and really our work has always, around this, has always really never been about the product. It has always been about the professional learning. So we started in this space with the traditional curriculum adoption with science and social studies. And my opening story that I share with you will probably be very telling about why I feel like our model is sustainable. But we started with professional development for our secondary science and our secondary social studies teams. The year ahead of their budgeting for their resource adoption, we just wanted to get them to think differently about instruction. So we're a one-to-one district, K-12, and so what does instruction look like in this century, in this time, with these devices? How can we do things differently? So in setting up the professional learning a year ahead of their adoption, we focused our social studies teams on content and resources. And we hired our consultant, very dear friend, Diana Laufenberg, who many of you may know. She is a social studies and really online resources guru. And we brought her to Liberty Public Schools to work with our secondary teachers. And then we hired the Buck Institute in Education to work with our science teachers as we started to move secondary schools to inquiry learning, to PBL. And we did that because our elementary schools had already been in that space and were really working through some inquiry in science with Project Lead the Way. So we have elementary Project Lead the Way. So this seemed to be kind of a perfect segue of learning for our adults. To make a long story short, by the time we were done working with Diana and working with our social studies teachers on OER and working with our science teachers on the practice of instruction with PBL, almost all of our science teachers went OER and only one social studies team did. So it's the opposite, right? In case I did not misspeak that. We PD'd OER and they all purchased textbooks. We PD'd instruction for PBL, and they all went OER.
Let that sink in for a moment. That's really incredible, because again, thinking through how Go Open was framed, the idea was to replace a textbook in one grade level in one content area. It was very intentional the way that it was approached. Except now, I get to zoom out a little bit, and I get to start to ask the questions around teaching and learning. And what do we want our classrooms to look like? Does it have to be a one-to-one setup for this to happen? So this is a testament to the professional learning around instructional models.
Exactly. So what we found with our teachers was we had been working through PLCs, we had been working through data teaming, and what we heard happening in the conversations around the instruction of the development of PBLs was our teachers started talking about the resources they were using and the instructional processes they were using. And they realized that they didn't need a book to support those inquiry lessons. What they really needed were alternative resources. So we captured that it was a small group, 35 secondary teachers. We captured that small group And we just brought together, part of the Go Open really support that we got was, one, start with a leadership team, and two, understand how to break out. So that first year captured for us, what does it really mean to develop teachers, not about necessarily the teaching, but the learning. And in the state of Missouri, we can speak to it, Bob can speak to this as well, but we also had the perfect storm of we became a non-common core state. So we rewrote all of our state standards, which also had everybody re-looking at the standards. So we used the Ainsworth model of curriculum development by really taking, I have to apologize to my Table 6 family for all the repeated stories I'm about to share. They've heard me all morning. But the idea that in 6th grade science, they have 136 standards in the state of Missouri. So when you focus on teaching 136 standards, it's really all about what I'm telling you and not about what's being learned. Liberty Public Schools, we really value that learning capacity. What is it that our kids know and are able to do with their learning? And we try, it's so hard to be distracted from that. I just want to know, we're not perfect at it. We get distracted by it all the time, but when we started looking at that and we focused on essential standards, we found ourselves in a place where open educational resources to support those specific standards fit us better than a book. And so the teams that elected to do that, and we did offer choice. So as you heard me say, we professionally developed our social studies team and they all bought textbooks. We don't hate textbooks. What we want is the perfect resource to be effective and efficient with student learning. And the one thing that we know, I mentioned this, and I think Eric's right in this conversation, where we would never give the credit for our students' high achievement. We would never give that credit to a resource, ever. We also will not give any diminishing returns to a resource. However, in old school, before Beth and I ever came to Liberty, we followed for example, in elementary school, we followed a mathematics resource as if it were a curriculum. So our teachers were a day-by-day, page-by-page check. So their understanding of mathematics instruction was tied to that book. So when you remove that from a teacher, their support of understanding of content is removed. And so really, it's that whole idea of really good content with really good pedagogy around it really makes a difference in the outcomes. And we know that because it really is about the teacher. So anyway, our journey started right there, and then we added, once we started, we had 6, 7, 8 mathematics and 6, 7, 8 social studies, 6, 7, 8 science, all of our high school science with exception of one course, and U.S. government. So we started out with about 15 courses, and they, so is that the next question about the money?
You're good. No, the journey. No, I'm just thinking about the journey. So you started as a Go Open launch district.
We did.
Which was to replace the one grade level content area. And then you quickly became an ambassador district. You did.
And number 1 on the summits, by the way. We were the first.
Yeah, they were. Liberty
summit.
was the first regional summit.
Just want to say that.
Because I called Jeanette when you call friends and you're like, hey, you want to do something? So that's great. Tell us a little bit about the board policies or the procedural decisions that needed to change in order to support this if we're talking about sustainability.
They're looking at me. I need to tell you that I've been in Liberty for a year and a half. And honestly, the second day on my job was the Go Open Summit. And so sometimes I'm kind of quiet, and I just need you to understand that there's a reason for that, because I'm learning as you are learning as well. And so for specific policy, I'm going to have to defer to you because I don't know what that would be.
Sure. So one of the things that we realized was our process around understanding and creating OER started to come into conflict with what our teachers believed was happening in the district. So our teachers were creating and selling items to Pinterest when clearly our board policy says otherwise. So that was the first tackle. And what we recognized was we started asking, so our network of friends that we met through Go Open, we started asking that question, how do we handle this? And when we finally ended up talking with our superintendent about it, he said this is not an area this is not a hill to die on. The work is bigger than this. So we really have settled into, and I would tell you, anything we publish, you can have for free. So if you want to buy it on Pinterest, you go right ahead. So we're just sitting in that, and we do everything we can to publish, so to make sure everyone knows where our curriculum is and where our resources are. And I do know in the state of Missouri, we have lots of people who call us and thank us, because we have 425 school districts in Missouri, and probably 350 of them are really small. So we're looking at, districts of 125 students K-12. That's small. So when we do that, we feel very fortunate to have a system and a team of people that can really produce and work through curriculum and really decide those essential standards, and then do all this curating and or creation or whatever, and share it with our friends who follow our standards. So that's really the only policy. We did create a system. We house everything in Google Docs, just so you know. So if you looked at Liberty Public Schools and you looked at our curriculum today, you could have everything. It is Missouri Learning Standards, I'm warning you. But all of our resources are there. And so those resources, what you'll see is all of our curriculum is open, and then anything that's, as we termed in Table 6, where our spine of resources is OER, it's in orange. So you can quickly find it, and we identify that up front. So when we first started publishing, we recognized that when a teacher, we learned this the hard way, when a teacher develops curriculum in their own Google Docs space, and then they leave, and there you go. So we found this perfect place to say, when we pay you to develop curriculum, which we have a system to do it, and I published all those documents I'm speaking about on the convening docs. So those are all linked under the LPS.
Really great resources.
And our journey is in there from our leadership team from day one. So we recognized that we needed to do something, so we created a system approach to Google Docs, and we have addresses now where when we pay you to create it under your own Google Docs, then you own it. You're the author. Once you transfer that ownership to us, we pay you. Okay, so that's how we control that piece. If we own it, and we will not hand you any money for the work that's done until you pass it over. So that worked great, and everybody understood that, and there really were no questions. Any teachers developing anything in their own space, still theirs. So that's kind of how we made the decision. And here's the funny thing is, now that it's there, they all want to hand it to us. So now that they've done that, and we don't force them to do it, now everybody's willing to do it, which I love.
So interesting.
It's teachers.
I know. The resources that you do have in there, you have been very open and transparent about sharing your financials, and we appreciate that. The first regional summit, when Joseph and I had the chance to attend, he sat in the session with your superintendent as well as your CFO, and he was like, they showed their budget. And he got so excited because they were talking about the reallocation of the funding back into the professional learning, which is huge. So I'm skipping a question here because I want to jump to this one since it kind of lends itself to that. How do you ensure that OER doesn't feel like one more initiative?
Go.
Are you sure? That's really difficult. I don't know. I started maybe putting check marks on it's on my plate, it's on my plate, we talk about that plate a lot. And so what goes off the plate versus what stays on the plate. I think that Jeanette and team, as these initial talks started to happen, did a really phenomenal job to really build it from the ground up. So taking teachers as a key component of the system and the development of it. And so through what we call curriculum council and heads of state, and then we have learning coaches and Jeanette then that leads that entire team. And with that, then you have teachers developing the process, the checks, the sustainability, looking back at even the curriculum that they write after state testing comes in to see, are the essential standards that we chose the essential standards that are being tested on? And so how do we vet what we've done in this sustainability model so that we're doing best practices for students and student growth and achievement? You might want to speak to that more. I don't know.
So what Beth is explaining to you is our process for selecting what we do, we give wholeheartedly to our teacher teams. So when it comes to curriculum resources, this is it for our department. And so we would not once think that we could make those choices without the teachers making them for us. So when we do that, we are guided by one of the board requirements when we went one-to-one was that we do not purchase one textbook for every child. So we've not done that in Liberty for some time. We do buy a shelf set just for backup for kids who maybe their devices in the sandbox or they have special needs. There's a variety of reasons why that would happen. But we do buy digital textbooks for every student. So that was a part of our agreement with our Board of Education. When we started looking at the resources and realizing we were capturing money, what you'll see on the budget that's in the documents is a comparison of what would happen if we would have had to purchase textbooks for everyone, or in our system, that shelf set. And what happened was we figured out the savings, and part of the sustainability of our model to this day is our superintendent and assistant superintendent said, if we don't purchase textbooks, then, and I asked, can we use this money and give it back to the teachers for their work? Would that be acceptable? When you look at that document, you'll recognize what we're talking about is $500,000. This is not a small amount. When our social studies department decided to actually purchase, and we really did start talking in actual purchase dollars and not perceived purchase dollars, it was far more than the amount of money that is showing on that document. It isn't even close to what it would be if we purchased one textbook for every child, which is almost $1 million to $1.5 million. So that would be the savings of a district that still lives in that land. So with our $500,000, giving that back to a teacher's brought in a whole new level of acceptance that teachers knew what to do with money like that. Every department that did that was able then to design their own professional learning year after year with a budget that they submitted to us. And we've realized after we first asked them, one, they didn't know how to do that. They had never had that level of choice in their own professional learning. And the second thing that we found out was that we had to give them some guidance in how it is that we sustain our actual OER work, so our curriculum and those resources. Because we didn't only pick OER, we also picked free. So there's a lot of free in there, and the frustration of free is when those links break, right? You publish it and you're done. So we built into that budgeting concept about 6 components. I still remember it was right when Beth first came, and we had this big brainstorming session in her office and on a tiny little whiteboard. It's very funny, and it was scribbled all over. But we recognized that the first 2 or 3 things that we put in there was you're going to look at your curriculum every year and you're going to check every link. And oh, by the way, did you pick the proper standards? So the beauty of our work in Liberty is our OER is focused on our essentials. So we don't try to find resources for all 136 standards. That would almost be unaccomplishable work for our teachers. They don't have the time, and we can't sub them out enough for that. However, we can do it when it's really wrapped around those essential standards. And we do look at every year, I shared this with my table, that in the 3 years, really since 2015, since we've been doing this, and we've landed on essential standards, our student achievement has only gone up. So instead of teaching 136, but focusing on the learning of 10 to 15, our students are still getting everything they need, and obviously a little bit more, because we continue to, it's hard when you're a high-achieving district already to close that, by the way. So we really do appreciate the fact that now we have a system that was part of that development perfect storm, where the OER is just attached to those components. So when you use your tier 1 instruction or that whole group instruction or your first round, sorry, don't want to dive too much into teacher talk, but when you get into that first round of instruction, what resource do you use if the students don't learn in the first swipe? OER provides that. It not only does it do that, but it allows us to differentiate with different kinds of resources that have already been collected that teachers can start using. Textbook does give you that. I'm just going to tell you straight up. Textbooks give them in an extra workbook or at the bottom with different kinds of. This is not something new. This is just something that's specific to the learning targets that our teachers have picked. So instead of having to go through and find out where they are, they're already determined and sitting right next to them. So those kinds of things we feel like have helped make the use of OER more efficient than trying to go back and pick the textbook. So, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
My work here is done.
I was just going to say it's messy a little bit. And so
Yeah.
even with curriculum adoption, you get past that first level, you know, that happened even before I came in, and then you assume everybody's going to go OER. And I appreciate somebody up here wasn't part of a team meeting and the AP, and then all of a sudden, what the heck happened? Well, that still happens with us as well. And so we just had facts. You know, we assumed FACS is going to go OER. It's perfect for them. How could
Family
they
and
not?
Consumer Sciences, in case you don't know what that is.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
And so, and then they came back and they all want to order a textbook. And we were super confused about that, like what the heck happened? But they're like, well, our pacing has to be the same. We have 2 high schools. We want to make sure that we're teaching the same thing at the same time. And then again, as leaders, we're thinking, oh my. You know, right when you think that you've moved to a certain level and people understand the importance of things, then we go back to pacing and are we teaching X on Y day? And you know, and so we're constantly going back and forth for things that we think that people understand that they don't. So it's still messy a little bit, but we're happy with it.
That's
But
okay.
it's still messy.
That's okay. Part of sustainability is all about iteration. I know that you are working with Learning Forward right now on your action research, which is very much entrenched in iteration. We celebrate our failures and we learn from them and we move forward, things like that. Tell us how you are approaching failure and kind of iteration.
So the beauty about failure is, and Christina knows this from our first dip into to go open, but the reason why she keeps us around is not because we have any answers.
Yes, they do.
The reason is because we continually ask the questions and we're not afraid of what's really happening. Yeah. So we had our government team write OER and then came up to us mid-year and said, yeah, we didn't use it. And we might want to go ahead and get a textbook. So we're not afraid of that. We just asked why. Yeah. So what did we not do to support you? How can we better help understand what's inhibiting you from using this resource that because we had a student teacher come in and use it and said it was the best thing he'd ever seen. So what's the change and how can we help? The same thing with our family and consumer sciences. How is it that we missed the professional development for their courses because we just assumed in a constructivist course that they knew how to deal with that and we didn't address it. I have a feeling when we go back and look at their instructional practices that they'll think differently. But they told us the answer and we didn't see it coming. So we're very open to just understanding where our teachers are and knowing here's where we want to be, how do we get there? We may not know, but we're willing to talk about it and be very honest about that. So.
And there's still resources that there's not enough for us. International Languages did a review, and as they went through it, they came back and said, we need to talk more, can we wait another year? So we thought, okay, so they talk more and they come back, and Chinese goes OER, Spanish goes OER, but German doesn't. They get a textbook because the resources aren't as clear there, or as there's not as many for them. And so those are real conversations too, that there's some areas where OER hasn't met the needs of what's happening for us yet. They will someday, but not yet.
And that's interesting because we know that OER is definitely a global movement, not necessarily just US based. And there are countries that are light years ahead of us in pre-K-12, OER in particular. And so how can we start to connect all of these communities internationally as well so that we have these resources that are available in different languages? I know that goes back to the Hewlett Foundation and supporting this work both domestic and internationally. So we appreciate all of these things being said. and knowing that there are some entities that are helping support this work. UT Austin right now has the Center on OER and Language Learning, and they're developing things around world languages. And so connecting them. I know that I could point to Heather Callahan. You guys chose to go into health, which is an area that has a lot of free resources, but not necessarily open. So a lot of great conversations around licensing and how do we make that a sustainable model kind of moving forward. We have 5 minutes left, and I want to open it up to anyone that wants to ask them a question. Don't all volunteer at once. Jennifer.
I appreciate your honesty. As a district that when you said like kind of the pushback and the surprise, it's so honest and so true, because even though I've been on calls with you, I assumed that like you guys like didn't have that anymore. So it's good to know that that still happens. Thank you. But my question for
This
you,
week.
Daily.
Daily, weekly.
my question for you is, so once you get that response of like we want to go with the traditional textbook, do you then, you said you go back and I guess what are the steps after someone says to you, we want to go with traditional? What do you do next?
Just in case you didn't hear, the question was, if you get the pushback, no, I just want to make sure. If you get the pushback, what are the steps?
Yeah, what are the
Yeah.
steps? Because you said like you went back and then they realized OER, that was
Right.
what they really wanted to do, but they didn't get there at that first attempt.
So really the work, again, for us, it's really around that teacher development. So in this scenario, like what Beth was saying about our languages, not all teachers are creators. Some of them are just flat out consumers. And they need that and they want that, and they're not willing to do or put in the work that it takes to do that. And what we can't do is make them something that they're not. So we just have to meet them where they are. And that's part of that professional learning piece. And it's all, like I said, it's always been about that for us. How can we provide the funding that helps them think differently about the instruction of their content so that student learning is the focus? And so when we see this conversation, we're just gonna go talk to them and say, really? Like, can you?
That's my question, really?
Really? Really, in our cooking class, tell me how many times you're going to access that textbook, and then let's talk about what can we do instead. Or you could have this time, because really the incentive, our love, is the incentive is when they start looking at that budget and realizing what they can do to purchase time and other resources, like our social studies team bought novels to tie in, our science team bought body components because they weren't in a book anymore and didn't have those pages, so they wanted the actual 3D models. So they got those chances to do that work that they would not have had before. So really, we just have to ask them.
And even traveling to professional conferences, that money is kind of a big piece so it is a huge incentive.
And I think a gap in what we're facing right now is that we tell them we have that money, we reinvest them when we're doing stipends, but we're not giving them the option of what to do with that money. We assume that they want it in their pocket as a stipend, but I'm wondering if what we're really missing is that they would have, if given the option, taken, like you said, the science, the 3D component, like maybe we just aren't asking the right questions. So thank you for that.
Well, even to come back, she was talking about purchasing days, so that means that they say, all right, as a science department, November 2nd, we're gonna get a sub, and we're gonna meet together all day and plan and work on our curriculum together and think about lessons and lesson planning and then kind of think about that bigger. Some really wonderful ideas cause systems issues. And so when you have 1,000 teachers and you have a department of 30 that says, oh, great, let's get together, and that's the same day as the Buck Institute, and we're pulling another 150 teachers out to be trained, and then all of a sudden our HR people say we have no subs. So there's some issues that in the process of it, the HR comes back and says, what are you doing? And then we have to go back and try to figure those pieces out.
Oh my goodness, we have time for one. Eeny, meeny, miny. Okay, Lee, please ask your question.
Right. When you say that your folks are writing their own and creating their own resources, do you have a sense of how much of it is from scratch versus how much is literally obtained from some other open resource reused?
So the question, if you did not hear, yeah. Do you know how much your teachers are actually creating from scratch or actually curating and revising and remixing?
So Yes, we do. And so here's the conversation that came up earlier on the panel. Very little is their own creation because they're scared to death and feel like they may be doing something wrong or it won't measure up to their peers' review. There's a lot of sensitivity around that. They'll share with each other. They'll give it to our client, all 160 kids in their science classes, but they won't put it out there for anyone else to see. So they do a ton of curation. Rarely does a course curate the whole thing. So our greater success has been that networking piece where they find something already created and then take it and remix it, rework it, change that's probably the number one way. We are next year, so we continue to grow. We've started with 15, we're up to 24. Next year, we will add, we are very excited about this. We spent all year working with our teachers and professionally developing mathematics instruction in K-5. And we will use Eureka/Zern as our spine for K-5 mathematics. It is an OER resource, and we spend a lot of time. We don't PD resources, so we spend a lot of time making sure our teachers have team time to collaborate about how they're using it, because the conversation really is about the instruction, right? And so how are they going to use this and fit it into our scope and sequence? So our scope and sequence isn't changing, right? We're still the same that we want. We're taking the resource and plugging it into what we feel is the best. So we have about 50 grade level teachers in each grade, 50 to 55. And so they come together, as what Beth was sharing was heads of state, with one person from every grade level team. They each send it, like Congress, they send somebody to this meeting where they all agree, and if that 11 don't agree, then they don't go back and tell they're their building's representative. So they come together on what that looks like, and we review now, because we've been able to put money into it, they review it twice a year. So they come in and look at, we change even our standards that we measure. So even our report card will adjust. Because as those standards are measured and we know those are essential, we use a proficiency reporting guide, so we really do use learning targets, and we report those to our parents. It's all online. You are welcome to see it. It's just Missouri Learning Standards, and we make sure that those things continually stay aligned, and we review them twice a year. So that's a new part of the budget that, by the way, when teams wrote curriculum, it wasn't 6 years until they came back to it. So when you say it's a viable curriculum, really, how many times did you look at that? We look at it twice a year now. Yeah. We never did that before. What gives us the ability to do that are the funds that we are using from OER.
And I always talk about the bumps. I must be the bumpy person. I don't know. So the PLTW a few years ago, we knew that was something we really wanted to adopt and be a part of it. So elementary, we put PLTW in the classroom. Then the state says, oh, aha, goodbye, Common Core. We're going to go to Missouri Learning Standards that doesn't align to PLTW, which we just adopted within our schools. So, then the state test comes out, and guess what happened? And what's happening in Liberty Public Schools with our fifth graders and our science scores, and oh my gosh, the sky is falling. So it's then how do you align to things where you really feel are essential? That PLTW practices and what it's doing in inquiry-based instruction and all of those pieces are just really vital in what we believe is best for kids, but yet we're still being tested on something, and how do you mold that in? And so that work with the teachers has been really crucial, and sometimes we're not ahead of it, and we're trying to catch up to things as well.
Can we give them a round of applause, please?